A joke this past week from somebody here in the congregation. I won't give that name away, so Dale Musser, that's safe with me. Yeah. But this gentleman lost his wife, and they've been married for a lot of years, and they were at the funeral, and as the pastor was, giving the sermon and everything was coming to a close, all of a sudden the sky got really dark, it started to storm, and it started to thunder really loudly. And all of a sudden the husband said, "Well, I guess she arrived." Think about that for a moment. You guys are rough. But I want to talk about Job. And when we talk about Job, there's a lot of things you can talk about. And as that song illustrated about how we cry out and sometimes we don't think that God is there. And there's other elements of that story. But we always have questions, especially people of faith. We always want to say, well, why do bad things happen to good people? Why are there so much violence in the world? Where is God in all of this? Why am I not living a life of peace when I have committed myself to what God wants? It doesn't really make sense. And as humans, we do not do very well with mystery. We do not do very well with questions. We want to figure things out. We want to know why things happen. We want to know things right away. So it gets a little uncomfortable when we can't figure all of that out and live with that mystery. But mystery, it really chaos. It can't really be arranged neatly. It is messy, it is hard, and it is tough. And sometimes it leaves a mark on us. It's very frustrating. And a lot of us will do what that song illustrated, what Job does here at the end of the story here that we'll get to. And they cry out to God. And they start to ask God, well, where are you, God? What are you doing, God? I have been praying to you, and it seems like you have been silent, and I'm still suffering. What is going on? Where are you? And a lot of people start to lose faith a little bit. So, and in chapter 38, and we'll read some of that later, but this is when God shows up. And before that, Job is faced with all of these ideas and these questions. And he's trying to figure out what is going on. And it comes out of a mindset that says that a lot of us do. That if we are good, we will be blessed. If we follow God, we will have a better time. If I just do what is expected of me in my faith, God in turn is going to bless me and keep me safe. And then the flip side of that, we say if you are not following God, if you are sinning, if you are doing things that you know you're not supposed to, if you don't have a relationship with God, well then you are going to have a hard time and you may be not blessed and things are going to be tough. We kind of have that mindset. If we are good, good things will happen. If we are bad, bad things will happen. But as we know, that is not what happens in our life. It's amazing we have been living this life for how many thousands and thousands and thousands of years as humans, and we still can't understand that. We still try to say, if I'm good, good things will happen. If I'm bad, bad things will happen. But it runs the spectrum, and it is messy, and it's chaotic, and it is hurtful, and we suffer. But we still try to understand those things. It helps us to process that, even if we don't quite know the answer. But again, most of the time, chaos finds us. And this story is frustrating. If you read the book of Job, it is frustrating because poor Job was innocent. Poor Job really didn't do anything, and all of a sudden, the devil and God are starting to make a wager. And the devil says, I bet you can pick whoever you want and the most holy person, and I bet you I can get them to curse you. I bet you I can give them to lose their faith in you. And of course, God says, well, okay, I'll take that bet. And how about my servant Job? He is a good person. I bet you can't get him to deny me. And again, the devil puts Job through the paces. He finds himself sitting among the ashes, scratching his head, saying, what happened? My flocks were stolen, my servants were murdered, my children were killed, my health is going away now. What in the world did I do to deserve this? Where are you, God? And of course his friends come and some of his family, and they try to tell him what he needs to do, and they're frustrated, and Job is frustrated in all of this. But where is God? So Job decides, which I think all of us want to do at times, Job decides to challenge God. I mean, have you ever wanted to do that? Have you ever wanted to say, all right, God, you and I are going to have it out? I don't know about you, but I have that conversation a lot. All right, Lord, I am at my wit's end. I am frustrated. I am tired of not feeling you, Lord. I don't know what's going on, and we keep suffering, and it seems like it doesn't end, Lord. And you just want God to show up for a moment and explain things to you. Well, Job had that chance. And I've said this verse quite a bit, but I love it. But if you want to, you can turn to the 38th chapter of Job. And this is the end of the story. Job is at his wit's end. He's scratching. He's mourning. He's sitting there scratching his head, covered in ashes, saying, I don't know, God. I'm about to die. Where are you? And Job says, Lord, show up. I have some questions for you. I want to know some answers, God. And then God shows up. But God doesn't show up with some nice pleasantries for Job. God doesn't show up to tell Job everything's going to be fine. I love this because the very first verse, the second verse here in the 38th chapter, it says this: the Lord answered Job out of the chaos. And this is what God said. When you're expecting God to give you something, this is what God responds. He says, who is this that darkens my door with things they know nothing about? I don't know why, but that verse echoes into my soul over and over again. Who is this that darkens my door with things you know nothing about? And then for the next 3 to 4 chapters, all God does to Job is present Job with questions. Were you there when I dug out the foundations of the earth? Were you there when I put the stars in the sky? Were you there when I painted the flowers that you see? Were you there when I did this? Were you there when I did this? If you were, tell me. Tell me if you were there when I set creation into motion. And he goes on and on and on. What do you do with that? Because if it was me and I was Job and I was already frustrated and the New Yorker was coming out of me, and then God shows up and says this to me, as much as it echoes into my soul now, God and I would have had words. Okay? And then God would have just, smited me. I don't know. Okay? But I would have been frustrated. I'd have been like, you mean I have been sitting here suffering and I have been crying out to you, and now you're going to show up and just present me with questions? What kind of deal is this? But we can learn a lot through this story. When God showed up, because the power of this story isn't that Job overcame everything. It isn't all of that. It is that Job found God in the chaos. It is that Job found God in the struggle. Because when we enter into the mystery, when we say that we don't quite understand this, when we say, all right, Lord, I don't get any of this, but I'm going to trust you, this is when we encounter God. This is when we find God, even in the frustrations and the questions and the hurt. God showed up and answered Job. It may not have been the answer Job was looking for, but God showed up in the midst of the chaos. God showed up in the midst of the hurt. God showed up and answered Job. That is some hope right there. That even though I don't know, God's going to show up. And it said that God answered out of the chaos, out of the whirlwind. That within this chaos, God came. So that tells us something. It tells us that God was with Job, that God was in the middle of it with Job. When nobody could figure things out and it was hurtful and Job was losing everything, God must have still been there, because God entered out of that mystery and that chaos. Again, Job was presented with questions, and we do not do good with questions, like I said. We all want to know that we have the truth. People want to know that when you're talking to somebody, they really know what they're talking about. If you want your car fixed, don't come to me, okay? Because I don't know what I would do. I just make things up, like Seinfeld. I don't know, you just need a Johnson rod. And anybody know that episode? That's exactly what would happen. I don't know, you need a Johnson rod. Oh, okay, put a Johnson rod in there. Here's my money. You know, you don't want to go to people who don't know what they're talking about. But at the same time, we have to realize that not everybody knows all of the truth, even though we try to fake it and we try to do that. Especially here in religion. And people come to ministers a lot of times and they want to know, well, what's the truth about this? What is in the Bible? What does this mean? Don't you have this figured out? And you will find pastors that will convince you that they have the truth, that they have studied for the last 50 years and they have it all figured out. And then you have people like me that some pastors don't like because I say, I don't know. I can give you an idea, I can give you an interpretation, but I have no idea. You know, one of my favorite theologians, Marcus, my mind went blank. Marcus Borg. Okay, he's a great theologian and very smart. And before he passed away, one of his last books was about how some of his theology has changed, and he kind of answered questions of what type of different topics. So he would talk about God and Jesus and sin and this and that. And I loved when it got to the chapter on heaven, because we all want answers, right? We all want to figure things out. But here's one of the most respected theologians, a very smart person. He's writing this book, and each chapter is about 20-some pages long on each topic. And you get to the chapter on heaven, and it is literally 3 pages long. And he basically says, I have no idea. It's like, I would like to think there is something, but I am not God. Here comes somebody that is so smart, willing to say, I don't know, but I'm going to enter into the mystery that is God and the mystery that is faith, and I'm going to trust that somehow God will be there in the end. That, to me, is what faith is about. Faith is the place where we go when we have no words. Faith is the place we go when we have no words. When I have nothing else, I can't explain things, I rely on my faith. And that faith says, somehow, God is going to be here. I don't know how, I don't know where, but God will be here. Because we find God in the moments. My job as a pastor, okay, whether you agree with this or not, is not to give you answers. My job as a pastor, our job as a church, is to provide space for you to enter into the mystery of God and wrestle with it. To come and say, I'm not sure how this is going to work out, but I'm surrounded by people who believe, and I'm surrounded by support, and I'm surrounded by people who have a faith that says, even though we can't figure this out, God is with us. That is what our job is. Not the answers, but to provide space for people to question. And it is tough, but it is in that mystery that we truly, truly find God. And I think that was the point of God's response to Job. Because Job questioned God. And God gave all these questions. So it wasn't about the answers. What God wanted Job to know was God was all powerful. That God was everything. And he laid that out. For 4 chapters, he said, were you there when I did this, when I did this, when I did this, when I did this? Because nobody else has done it. I am the God. I am the one that will see you through this. So when the phone rings and we get that news that we are dreading, when the cancer comes back, when we go in for surgeries and they don't go how we're supposed to go, when we lose loved ones, when our family falls apart, when we lose our job, when we turn on the news and we see violence and chaos everywhere in this world, there is bloodshed and death. And we just have to shake our head and say, wow, where is God? Instead of walking away from the faith, we can say, you know what? I don't have the answer, but I know God will show up. I know that God is all powerful. That is the power there. God is the only one that knows, and we are not God. That is both frustrating and freeing at the same time. Right? I saw a bumper sticker once that said, there's 2 truths in this world. There is a God, and you are not it. Think about it. Because we want to be it. We want to have it figured out. But I love that. There is a God, and you are not it, John. So stop it. Let God be God. It doesn't take away the hurt sometimes. And it doesn't take away the suffering. And it doesn't change the fact that some people do some evil things. But what it does is it says, okay, I'm going to have faith that somehow, God's going to show up. God's going to be here and bring healing in some way. That is the power of faith. That God will answer. And that needs to be enough sometimes. We're going to close with one of the best hymns, most favorite hymns. It is well with my soul. I think, I think this is very important to understand that when we are faced with insurmountable problems, we can still say it as well with my soul. Even if tears are flowing down our face, we can say it as well with my soul. Even if we don't have the questions and everything figured out, we can say it as well with my soul. And we can say that because we know there is a God. We know that God will show up and walk with us through the darkest of times. So if you'll please stand as we close with this song.